And thank you all for coming out and joining me today and bringing me down to this wonderful college campus. And I just saw the lions, which I'm very excited about. We don't have any lions. We have a moose that wanders around the Dartmouth campus sometimes, but then someone comes and shoos it away. What's your name?
Tori. T-O-R-Y-A.
As one word? The genre that I work in is called sometimes literary journalism, sometimes called literary nonfiction or creative nonfiction or immersion journalism.
Right.
My favorite is one coined by a friend of mine, Bill Wasick, editor at Harper's. He calls it submersion journalism, which I kind of like. It means, you go into another world, and instead of, journalism is important. What we're doing here right now, you're asking questions to write it down. The immersion journalism thing would be, if you said, I'm getting on the plane with you and I'm going to shadow you for a long time and just see your life. So you got to do both, obviously.
Right.
But yes, long way around to say yes, and in a sense that I like to think of journalism expansively. It doesn't have to be with facts, and I think that's important for those. Some people debate that about creative nonfiction, and I do not debate that at all because I've worked as a regular journalist too. But they say it's sometimes it's called the literature of fact. You take the methods and practices of journalism and you combine it with fictional techniques, not with fiction, but it means you pay attention to character, to scene, to narrative, to telling the story, to set setting the mood and so on. I would argue that this is more accurate, this is more truthful, if you can really do it, and especially I think because I write so often about religion. Part of the reason, there's all sorts of reasons I do that, but one of the reasons is because I love this kind of writing.
Right.
That's the best way to get you out of the stack of facts. Reporting a lot of times is a stack of facts,
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
And if you're reporting about what someone believes and their experience of that, well, we're talking about intangibles. I cannot, you tell me the Holy Ghost just came into the room, I'm not going to write, however, that was incorrect. The door did not open, your experience, that means I need to pay attention to who you are as a human being in order to understand that. So I think that's what you can get with this kind of writing. I'm not as crazy about the term creative nonfiction, though that's what we call it at Dartmouth College, so I have to. But I'm not as crazy about it because it loses hold of the journalistic roots. That you got to go out and you have to ask questions. And not only that, you got to check your facts. And in fact, the story often resides in that space between what you thought you knew and what you find out. The story, if I was to tell a story of this, I'm like, well, UNA, I bet this is a real conservative school, and I bet nobody's going to show up, except for one person who's going to, yell at me.
Right.
And that did happen, except it was an atheist. He was a nice guy,
Here, today?
Well, oh no, that fell in the back.
Okay, yeah.
I was expecting that kind of repeated line of questioning coming
from
how dare you say Jesus is not king? So the story here is obviously in me, so to speak, checking my facts and encountering, this place is more complicated and more interesting. And it contains what I thought it did, but it also contains all these other things.
Right.
So that's why I like the word journalism should be part of what this genre is. Well, on the one hand, look, the religion beat at newspapers around the country is dying. So if you want to go off and work on a daily newspaper, it's probably not the way to go. On the other hand, daily newspapers are dying too.
Right.
I mean, very rapidly dying, and it's accelerating. And so that, whereas writing about religion, and as some of these old ways of doing things die, I'm actually an optimist. I think now is a great time for journalism, now is a great time for publishing and so on, because people are starting small things. So, I mean, I look at, to me, the best book review in the country right now is called the Los Angeles Review of Books. It's online only, and it's created by a bunch of refugees and exiles from, the LA Times and so on. And so suddenly people, and you're like, they're not constrained anymore, so you might as well do what you want. It's a little bit like college radio,
Right.
You might as well play what you want on college radio. No one does college radio so that they can, work themselves into the boring hit format. That's why you always find interesting music on college radio. So, the advice is that, yes, now is actually an exceptionally good time to do it, partly because the old order is breaking down. So you can do what you want. And if you come to this doing something that not everyone else is doing, well, you've got a lot of room to roam. I mean, you just say you look at politics. Here we are in 2012. Now, I've been doing this now for a while. Every time the press corps gets caught off balance by the role of religion in the campaign, and every time they say, "Oh, that's old. That's not going to happen." They've been doing this since 1925. Mm-hmm. And here it is again with Rick Perry and Michelle Bachmann. Probably Perry could be the nominee. And if Mitt Romney's a nominee, no one's talking about this now, but his Mormonism is going to become a much bigger deal. Religion is going to be part of, and they're not prepared, and they do a terrible, terrible job. And so the journalist who understands this stuff, you've got your way into not just the Saturday religion section. You've got your way into politics. It's a part of American life. We're a very religious nation. We're unusual amongst developed nations in that regard. My journalistic method is empathy for the devil. Not sympathy, empathy. Very important distinction.
Sure.
And what you describe, I encounter all the time. Folks who have maybe grown up in a church or a religious background that was very restrictive, and they've rejected that. And they've rejected so fiercely that they reject family and friends and so on. And they forget that those people are human too. And I think as a writer, if you approach things with empathy for the devil, you know what I mean by empathy. You're trying to understand. Sympathy means, I share your beliefs. Sure. Empathy means I want to kind of inhabit your. What does it feel like to believe that?
Right.
And that extends. When I say empathy for the devil, I speak from experience, having spent a long period of time with a guy planning genocide, and what my job in that story was to understand for a moment what it felt like for that to make sense. Now, if I can do that, then surely students and young people who are mad at their parents can use their imagination to project into that world, to understand why their parents maybe raised them in a tradition that they no longer believe in. Or maybe if you are a fierce atheist, to understand why your roommate, it's really important to her that she needs to go to church on Wednesday and Sunday morning, and that gives a lot, and it doesn't mean that she's stupid or anything like that. That might be a real source of strength for her. And also even to understand, a character like Ron Luce, who I talked in the story of tearing the mannequin apart. I mean, that piece that I read you was not empathy. That was just descriptive. But it's spent a lot of time with Ron, and especially with his students, the people who are following him, trying to understand how they got to this place. And that's sort of why I ended with that thing. They're drawn in. Once I did that, I realized there's a lot of lefty writers who write about that group and really, don't like it. And I said, look, they're responding to the same thing that leftists are saying about feeling pushed around by corporations, about being, branded, about not, being told what to like, and so on. That comes from, maybe a Buddhist place too is a good way to do it. Buddhist, the first noble truth is suffering. Don't forget other people suffer. When you do that, you can get that empathy. It doesn't, and then you can develop the criticism if you want. And they say, I understand where you're coming from, but.
But here you go.
Yeah. 9/11 really did radically change that, and when I said these politicians out there now saying that the First Amendment doesn't cover Islam, to say that is to hold the founders of our nation in contempt, because they specified Islam. You go back to those documents; they were very clear, and there's a number of documents from the early founders, partly because Muslims existed then too. Some of these folks seem to think that it was invented in 2001. And from very powerful nations who want to understand that everyone here in the United States is welcome. Christian, Jew, Muslim, Hindu, that's also specified by the founders. Not in the First Amendment, but in the other documents. And then you get into, this is actually one of the next projects I'm working on now, is remember the Oslo Killer, Anders Breivik, and his epic 1,500-page manifesto. I'm doing a reading of that for Harper's Magazine, and inspired by all these American sources. Now, some of those folks were there, but Islam was on a track toward real acceptance in the United States, partly because, I don't want to say it's an immigrant faith alone, because it's not. There's African American Muslims, and then there's just Muslims who've been a part of the country from the very beginning. But especially Sunni Islam, the majority kind of Islam. I mean, that is largely immigrants, and they tend to be, a fairly stable communities, very education oriented, everything someone wants in a good neighbor. And then comes 9/11, right? And the incredible demonization. And one of the really terrifying numbers is that's just grown. And 2003, I can't remember the numbers, but anti-Islamic sentiment gets worse every year. And I think we're up to now 53%. And what you saw happening, especially in the Christian right, and this was disturbing to me, there was I think maybe 2005, when Ted Haggard, who was, remember Pastor Ted, he was then the head of National Association of Evangelicals, had this big gathering of 3,000 pastors from around the country. And they said, what's the front line of the culture war? And they had a debate. Some thought it was the homosexual, singular, they use an archetype, and some thought it was the Muslim. The good news and the bad news. The good news is I think more and more that kind of Christian conservatism, it's not turning away from homophobia, but it's, as Ted Haggard said, look, gay marriage is coming, there's no way. A number of these leaders will say that off the record. But, so they say the real fight is with Islam. And they want to build a kind of Cold War style consensus around it, and it's disturbing that here we are now into the I guess the third year almost of Obama's presidency, and anti-Islamic sentiment gets worse and worse and worse. And I'm not blaming him at all. I'm just saying that the national political culture doesn't slow it down. Long-winded answer to say
no, that's fine.
It's a real problem. It's a problem of I use the word madrasa here, and I bet a lot of people, at one point I was writing something, and I was writing something about a Christian right leader named Francis Schaeffer. I don't know if you know, he was a big inspirational guy. I had a school in the Swiss Alps called La Brie, and I said it was kind of a Christian madrasa. People got so angry at me. I said, what? Madrasa means school. There's bad schools and there's good schools. Yes, yeah. It's called democracy. It's great. It's called democracy, and it's also called tolerance, but that's a deeply misunderstood word. Tolerance doesn't get. Some people are like, yes, we must all have tolerance, and they seem kind of wet noodles, and then there's the other people like tolerance. Tolerance does not mean that we're sitting together singing Kumbaya. Tolerance, as John Locke understood it, meant, boy, I disagree with you. I disagree with you a lot, and we are going to have a debate, and I'm going to use sharp elbows, but I won't kill you. And that's important. When you have that understanding of tolerance, that tolerance means that we may have a coalition of people who don't agree, and we're going to have fierce debate. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, I have to say the Tea Party is proving it, because those people are all over the ideological map. And the Christian right, they have a concept called co-belligerency, which, after a long period of Protestants and Catholics being each other's throats, you get these Christian right leaders and these one faction of the Catholic Church can get leaders saying, let's get together. We dislike the same things. Let's dislike them together, even though, you're going to hell and you're going to hell. I mean, this, coalition is very possible, and I think those of us, and I'm happy to identify myself as on the progressive side of things. Obviously, I am, right?
Me too.
Need to do some more work on that front, and do the work on the sense. That's where I'm always sort of attacking harmony, because I think progressives like the idea, so they want like a very peaceful coalition. Coalitions aren't peaceful. And you don't want them to be. You want them to be democratic. The right's got that down. It would be nice to see the left step up. And there's been moments in American history, 1930s being one of them, when the left understood that. But we're waiting for lefty, I guess. The family, this conservative religious organization, it's unusual even within the Christian conservative movement. The oldest, and I would argue most influential within American politics. And part of it comes out of this very unusual theology, and this is where it becomes important, again, for progressives. Progressives don't want to mess with theology. They think they know it. I don't like that, whatever. Read the theology, because, there's a lot of differences. And there's a lot of, like I said in the presentation, a guy I work with a lot of the time is a fundamentalist conservative Christian. But his fundamentalism means freedom of religion. The family reads the New Testament, and that's kind of unfortunately all of them, most of them read the New Testament. And they're doing something interesting. They're saying, what is constant throughout here? And they say power is this line that you can draw through it. And they're correct. That is absolutely present in the text. Mm-hmm. It's not alone in the text. But when you try to do that reductionist reading that comes out of this kind of sort of American, they were very influenced by a 1925 bestseller called The Man Nobody Knows, with Jesus. And it was by one of the founders of modern American advertising, Bruce Barton. And their idea was, let's all this religion stuff, it's crap. Let's get out of the way. What's the bottom line here? By the way, liberals are susceptible to this idea too. The church, I'm just a Jesus man. No, the church, the scripture, all those things, those arguments, that's part of the debate. That's part of the messy democracy. When you wipe that out, you can end up with a bottom line that is just power in itself. If you see that constantly throughout the New Testament that Jesus is powerful, even when he's so powerful that he can be killed like this, and allow himself to be killed, then you come up with this idea, as this organization does, and as they're teaching American politicians. This sounds so over the top, but you can go see it on video. The best way to understand Jesus is to look at Stalin, Hitler, Mao, not because they're Nazis or communists. They say those are evil men, terrible evil men, but they understood power. They understood strength. It's this fetishization of strength, and that's the bottom line. You don't want to get into talking about bottom lines. Let's get into talking about, humanity. Because when you strip that away, that's all you have left is power. And that's what Stalin knew, and that's what Hitler knew, and that's what Mao knew. But that is not the story of the New Testament, and it's a shame when people reduce it to that.